think my wife and kids are actors. I've been married to Marie, my wife, for 15 years now. We have 2 kids together, Aaron, who is 10, and Priscilla, who is 8. I've always pictured us as the perfect family, you know? Nice, spacious house in a good neighborhood, barely any arguments, well-behaved, healthy kids with good grades. Everything seemed spotless. But lately I've been noticing things that have made me question everything in my life. But let's start at the beginning. I have always been a workaholic. For the last 20 years, I have averaged 150 yearly commuter days. I spend more time in airports than I do with my own family. So it's only to be expected that things changed when I suddenly found myself stuck in the house 24/7, right? That is exactly how I was trying to justify the weirdness. I had hardly spent a full weekend with them in years. It is going to take some time to get used to me hanging around here constantly. I suffered a pretty serious neck injury on the job a few months back, which kept me hospitalized for a good 2 weeks. I am mostly fine now, but because of the nature of the fracture, I still have to wear a collar for stabilization. And there is at least a couple of months until I'm ready for work. So I spend my days just wandering around the house, not quite knowing what to do with myself. My wife is a stay-at-home mom. She is the love of my life. We met at a company retreat 17 years ago, and we hit it off immediately. Soon we fell in love, got married, spawned kids. You know the deal. She left the company when Aaron was born. I was making enough for both of us, so I was happy to see her happy. But now things are different. I have no idea if she's happy anymore. She always smiles, always laughs, but it feels so emotionless, forced even, and she sneaks out when she thinks I'm napping. At first I thought she was having an affair or something, but I'm not so sure anymore. My kids are just weird around me. Aaron won't look me in the eyes, and Priscilla seems to avoid me at all cost. I shrugged it off the first few weeks. Maybe they just needed a little more time. But time didn't help. Time only made it worse. My wife keeps sending them to her parents every weekend. They love it there, she says. She allows them to sleep over at their friend's place too often as well, even on school nights. I've tried to set some boundaries, but my wife just ignores them. She knows them best, she says. Can't argue with that. At night, when she thinks I'm sleeping, my wife sneaks out of bed and makes a phone call. Just one. She is away for maybe 30 minutes before returning to bed. I have tried sneaking down after her, but I can never get close enough to listen in. I'll get a few words or phrases, but nothing that makes any sense. She looks visibly upset, though. That much I have gathered. The first few times, I confronted her about it, but she just said it was one of her friends needing some advice. I didn't want to press matters too far because of the way she looked at me. Cold and emotionless. I shudder at the thought of it. I tried driving my kids to soccer practice and gymnastics twice a week, hoping to get some conversation started. They seemed really upset at the idea of me taking them anywhere, and my wife desperately tried to get me to reconsider, but I insisted. I stopped taking them after a week. The look in their eyes scared me. It was like the very presence of me made them so uncomfortable that it nearly induced panic attacks in them. I was at my wits' end at this point. Laying awake at night, my mind started drifting. I have always joked that I spend so much time away from them that they could easily be replaced and I would hardly notice. And then I remembered the Aaron incident. I sat up in bed, sweating. The Aaron incident. When Aaron was 2, a few months before Priscilla was born, I had been spending months at a time on a job. When I got home for a much-needed long weekend, my wife and son greeted me at the airport. Only it wasn't my son. I didn't recognize him at all. I stood there frozen for minutes before my wife, looking quite flustered, snapped me out of it. "Pick him up," she said. "He just wants to hug his father." I picked him up and just stared at him. He didn't seem familiar at all. At this point, I was starting to feel unwell, like I had to throw up or something. I couldn't understand why I didn't recognize him. When we got home, I told everything to my wife, and she said it was because I spend too much time away. Kids at that age grow and change like crazy, she explained. It took me weeks to accept it, but at some point I just realized I was acting like a lunatic and got on with my life. The thought of the Aaron incident sparked something in me. I started thinking back to other strange, seemingly explainable things that had happened. Like that I wasn't present when my wife gave birth to any of the kids. That I was never around much the last trimester of her pregnancies. That I have never actually met any of her relatives except for her parents, who've always been strange around me. I started feeling dizzy and nauseous just thinking about it. Was the last 17 years of my life a lie? It seemed so impossible, but at the time I couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong. The only thing I knew for certain was that I had to get to the bottom of this. Otherwise, I was afraid I was going to lose my mind. I started paying more attention to every little detail that went on in the house. Every conversation, every phone call, every movement, any little detail that could explain what was going on. There was always something that never quite made sense. Just a tiny little thing that would catch my eye. How they always seemed to talk in perfect order, like they were reading from a script. Like how they always seemed to know who was coming up the driveway just moments before they actually did. Like it was all some elaborate stage act. I was getting more paranoid by the minute, and I think they noticed that something was wrong. That's when my wife sent me to therapy. She said I needed it, that I had been acting different ever since I got home. Like everything was my fault. I tried explaining to her that I was probably just a bit anxious because I wasn't used to living there, but she wouldn't hear it. My first session went as I suspected. The therapist was desperately trying to get me to question myself and my motives. I didn't share anything with him. I simply couldn't trust him. Maybe he was in on it. Maybe they were trying to label me insane, lock me up in some godforsaken asylum. To what end? In any case, I couldn't afford to spill my suspicions just yet. I needed some proof. I told my wife everything went great and that I understood I might be coming on too hard. I was going to take it easy and not force them. I would leave them to it and learn as I went along. All that jazz. She smiled one of her obviously fake smiles and gave me a cold hug. She was so pleased, she told me. I was going to get better in no time. Sure, lady. I had come to realize I approached the matter from the wrong angle. I shouldn't have given away my suspicions so easily. Instead, I should have followed the one trail they could not hide. The money. If they were indeed actors, they had to get paid, right? And there had to be some evidence of some transaction somewhere, even if they got paid in cash. I could perhaps follow them and catch them in the act. Yes, this was a plan. I spent days without sleep going through bank records, receipts, the GPS of the car, without getting anywhere. Everything seemed just fine, nothing out of the ordinary. I was tearing my hair out in despair when fate suddenly intervened and they slipped up. Just a tiny mistake, mind you. They could have easily gotten away with it if I wasn't already in a state of complete awareness. One morning, my wife was getting the kids ready for school. Everything was normal. Eating breakfast, packing their lunches, ushering them into the car. The old, "We're gonna be late for school." But it was just this one tiny detail. The school was closed that day. My wife did not know this, but I had looked through all the papers I could get my hands on, one of them being the school calendar. And that day, they were definitely closed. I don't know if you have experienced such a feeling. It's like a mix of total relief and utter devastation all at once. It proved to myself that I wasn't insane, but at the same time, I realized my life was a lie. And that day wasn't about to get any less absurd. Not only did my wife not realize that the school was closed, she also forgot her purse. And in it, I found the one thing I had been looking for the past few days. A paycheck. Now, the paycheck wasn't made out in her name, or the name I knew her by at least. It was made out to one Lisa Guerin. But it wasn't that little detail that threw me off. It was something else. Something extremely disturbing. Something impossible. It was the name listed as the employer. It was me. I was the employer.